I want to talk about an interesting story in today's Wall Street Journal. What'd you say, Paul? Rachel Lisicki of Phoenix, Arizona was the winner of the iHeartRadio contest. The next one will be at 8:35 tomorrow morning on Jay's show, then 11:05 on Vicky, 1:05 on Rush, and again 5:05 on my program. Interesting story in today's Wall Street Journal about how conservative pundits, some of whom are open to supporting Mitt Romney, admit that he has a hard time relating to them. The one thing I figured out, and it's the only thing I figured out in the Republican presidential race, is that the reason it is still going on is because Romney can't close the deal. This thing has always, all along, been about Romney. Everybody else flops up and down. They all have their moment. But Romney never really goes up, just as he never really goes down. In the case of many conservatives, I think they want to embrace him. In the case of others, they don't want to embrace him. But almost none of them get the sense that he's actually a conservative. And this is the thing that's fascinating about Romney. Romney is running on perhaps the most conservative platform of any of the four remaining Republican candidates. And he ran as a conservative 4 years ago also. Yet, many just don't think he's a conservative. I'm going to share with you this story in the New York Times, which quotes a number of prominent conservatives like Ann Coulter, Christopher Ruddy, Krauthammer, and so on. One morning in January, Christopher Ruddy, chief executive of the conservative magazine and website Newsmax, sat with Mitt Romney in his hotel room at the West Palm Beach Courtyard Marriott in Florida and offered some blunt advice when dealing with the news media. Quote, he needed to do a better job reaching out to conservative writers and pundits, Ruddy told the candidate. But then, sensing that he wasn't breaking through, Ruddy stopped. Quote, there was a lack of interest on his part as to specific recommendations I might have, he later recalled. My feeling from them was that while they were happy to listen to the information, they weren't going to act on it. From the television studios of Fox News to the pages of the Weekly Standard, the refrain of the conservative opinion machine is virtually the same. Mitt Romney doesn't talk to us, doesn't get us. He's not a glad-hander, said Joe Scarborough, co-host of MSNBC's Morning Joe and a former Republican congressman. He's not like Bill Clinton or George H.W. Bush, who loved to sit on the phone and work people. Romney's distant, complicated relationship with many of the conservative media's leading voices has heightened concerns that his convictions are not as genuine and deep-seated as their own. Let me interject. Even though the story's appearing in the New York Times, I think that's an excellent analysis. Isn't that the sense that most of you get who are conservative? That your conservative values are held more deeply by you than Romney's are. The story continues. Many commentators have pounced on some of Romney's recent remarks, saying, quote, he is not very concerned about the very poor because they have a government safety net, and that he was a severely conservative governor as proof he cannot speak their language. Quote, the real problem here is that it shows he does not have fluency with conservative ideas, Charles Krauthammer, the conservative columnist, said on Fox News. The moral case for conservative economics is that our policy is going to help everybody, including the poor. Or, as Rush Limbaugh noted the other day on his radio show, quote, I have never heard anybody say I'm severely conservative. It's a good point. Rush is right. I've never heard anybody use those words together before. I've never heard the term severely conservative until Mitt Romney said it. Story continues. Ann Coulter's experience with Romney offers a telling case in point. She endorsed Romney in November, well before many of her peers in the conservative commentariat. Yet, she said she had never had a conversation with him or his campaign. When she attended a Romney fundraiser last month at the Palm Beach estate of Stephen Ross, the owner of the Miami Dolphins football team, she had to seek him out. Let me interject. Given how much water Ann Coulter's carried among conservatives for Mitt Romney, wouldn't it occur to you that if Mitt Romney was any kind of a politician, he would have sought out Ann Coulter to thank her? Think about that for a minute. And if you've ever had any dealings with politicians, anyway, the story continues. They then quote Ann. After Mr. Romney was done addressing the gathering, Coulter waited off stage and introduced herself, the first time since 2008 that she had seen him. And she said, quote, "I said you owe me, and you better be as right-wing a president as I'm telling everyone you're going to be," she recalled. He laughed and basically agreed. Romney has never displayed much ease with journalists, at least not in the same way that other Republicans have. The elder President Bush was known for dropping by the press area in the White House to talk to reporters. His son was chummy enough with the press corps traveling with him during the 2000 race that he gave many of them nicknames. And for the better part of its 2008 campaign, John McCain would regularly invite journalists back into the inner sanctum on his bus, the Straight Talk Express. Romney's outreach in 2008 was more apparent. At the 20th anniversary party for Limbaugh's radio show, he sat with the radio host. He visited the Manhattan offices of Rupert Murdoch at least twice. But 4 years later, he is elusive to many. Andrea Tantaros, co-host of The Five on Fox News, said she was surprised the Romney campaign has not tried to push back against some of the more withering criticisms that commentators make every day on cable television and online. In 2008, Tantaros could expect a phone call from an irritated Romney advisor if she made critical comments about him. But now the silence is notable, she said, quote, "You'd think they would have reached out long ago to stop the negative commentary. And they haven't. And if anyone would receive an angry phone call from the Romney campaign, it would be Tantaros. She served as a communications director for William Weld, the former Massachusetts governor, whose political strategists now work for Romney." Romney's relations with the news media are more distant than they are hostile, and he enjoys friendly interactions with television hosts like Sean Hannity, whose radio and cable programs have been one of his regular stops, and Larry Kudlow of CNBC, who was an economic advisor in the Reagan White House. "When I read what my friends and colleagues are writing," Kudlow said, "what jumps out at me is A, Mitt does not have long-term conservative movement credibility, and B, people have not entirely forgiven his early days in politics when he ran against Ted Kennedy and was governor of very liberal Massachusetts. Some believe the criticism is just part of the ritual flogging that Republicans put their candidates through every 4 years to determine whether they are sufficiently conservative. I think it's a natural part of the process, and I think Mitt knew that when he decided to run again," Kudlow said. And others occasionally give him the benefit of the doubt, saying they think his heart is in the right place, even if the words sometimes come out wrong. Quote, "We'll be happy to translate for him in these columns," the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal wrote earlier this month, but it would be less politically painful if Romney sat down for a week-long tutorial with, say, Paul Ryan, Mitch Daniels, Jeb Bush, and others who can help him. I think it's an interesting piece. Romney doesn't seem to be reaching out to conservative opinion leaders. So far as I know, he hasn't done anything to reach out to Rush. And when he does talk about some of these things, the language is odd. One gets the sense he's trying to be conservative as opposed to being himself. Now, I say this as somebody who has declared Romney good enough. That's been my stance on Romney. I was pretty critical of him last year, but as virtually everybody else fell by the wayside, including some candidates that I would hope would have performed better and others that I would have hoped would have entered the race who didn't. And we were confronted with a motley crew that included a buffoon like Gingrich and a guy who is just dangerously wrong on half the policy issues in this country like Paul. And knowing that beating Obama is an incredibly high priority, I've declared in my mind Romney good enough. That's how I evaluate him. But he's never been my top choice. And as this piece, and I read this piece, I just feel as though it's written about me. He's hard as a conservative to warm up to. There are certain ways, if you are a conservative, that you talk about the issues. Romney's saying, "I'm not worried about the poor, they have a safety net." Conservatives don't say that. They say that if you follow our economic policies, We will have growth in America, and the biggest beneficiaries of that growth are people on the lower end because they are the ones who win when people start spending money, when employers go out and hire, when people who have money invest it and spend it. The money does spread throughout the country. That's like gospel in terms of our economic beliefs. But he didn't put it that way. He didn't say that. He's like, well, they have a safety net. Conservatives don't speak like this whole, I was a severely conservative governor. Severely? What does that even mean? No, it may be that Romney's just kind of an awkward guy. And the fact that he doesn't say things in a certain way may be neither here nor there. A lot of people, for example, are of an opinion that Romney would be a more conservative president than you would suspect, because he's a smart guy and he realizes that we have to make significant changes in policies in this country or we will not survive. That his hand is going to be forced. That may be the case. But I think this nomination race would have been sealed off a lot earlier than this if it was easier for conservatives to simply embrace Romney, easier than at least it is. Maybe this is Santorum's moment, maybe not. I think Michigan looks like it might be a defining race. Romney can hold the firewall and hold Michigan. Be a big deal for him. Santorum wins Michigan. Hard to see how you could say that Santorum's not the front runner for the nomination. Whatever. At some point, someone's going to win. And it may well be Romney. And it may well be that out of necessity, the majority of conservatives will embrace him. Because we all know what the alternative is. But he does make it hard. And while he's running, as I said, on a very conservative platform, and I'll say that Romney's platform is very conservative. There are almost no issues out there where he doesn't have a core conservative, agenda. It's kind of like this. And I know guys who've been married who've gone through this. When there's a girl who had a past, she's kind of been around the block a lot, you always kind of wonder whether or not she's changed. You know women like that. You've talked to guys who ended up marrying women like that, but they had those doubts, right? For people offended by that, I could reverse that with women. Women are looking upon a guy as husband material and they see that he was a goof off for years and years and years and messed around and maybe was into drugs and had way too many girlfriends and never carried a job. But for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, he's been on his feet and he's been solid. He's got a job. He's been a decent boyfriend. Looks like he's good husband material. You wonder, though, don't you? Is the guy that's here right now the real him, or is it the other one? And if you don't say the exact right things and you don't act as though you really want, and I think that's another part of it. I can tell you that the Republicans who look down their nose at people like me and don't want anything to do with me, you can spot it from a mile away. Oh, that's the conservative talk radio crowd. Whereas those that are actually interested in hearing from you won't necessarily name names here. But virtually every one of the conservative politicians who's gone out and has not been a phony but has walked the walk in addition to talking the talk, they are all the ones that have always been interested in what people like myself have had to say. Paul Ryan, Ron Johnson, Scott Walker, they've always wanted a line of communication with people like myself. They're not embarrassed by it. That's not necessarily true of some of the other Republicans. And on a related note, proving my point, when I wanted to talk to State Senator Neil Kedzie about his earlier in the week sellout and abandonment of conservative principles by pushing forth that terrible version of the mining bill, Kedzie never even wanted to talk to me. Didn't want to explain what he was side was, still hasn't returned the call. Now, that doesn't mean that Neil Kedzie isn't a conservative. He is a conservative. I said so on the show yesterday. He was all wet on this issue. He seems to be coming around right now. But it's telling to me when they can't bring themselves to even speak to you. Well, I'm the guy communicating with the people who vote for people like you, Kedzie. The fact that he didn't want to, these talk radios, they're so unreasonable, they're so this, they're so that, they're so the other thing. You wonder if that's what Romney is, a guy who's got those beliefs deep down as well. And as I said, I can live with him. He's good enough. You ask me right now, I guess I'm inclined to support Santorum before Romney. There's not a tremendous amount of enthusiasm in my voice here. I kind of like Santorum, actually. I like his message. Don't like some of his voting records in the past, but I like his message. I like the fact that he's got a middle-class appeal to his message. He talks about growth. He talks about manufacturing, and he seems committed to these issues. There's a passion to him. But despite everything that you heard here, Romney to me is good enough. Gingrich isn't. To Heartland and Steve, you're on News Talk 1130 WISN.
Hi, Mark. Well, I'm a huge, enthusiastic Romney supporter, have been from the beginning. And on any of the issues that people criticize him on, I could refute their claims from the beginning. On health care, Santorum likes to get in the weeds and talk about Massachusetts. And as Romney told them, if you're concerned about Massachusetts health care,
I'm not denying any of that. I'm not denying that Romney is running as a conservative. You just get the sense, though, he just doesn't feel like the conservatives I'm used to being around. You get the sense almost that he's been cast as a conservative as a movie, and he's playing the role. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Do you think that people would have reacted the same to Ronald Reagan, though, when he made the switch? I believe him.
No.
I think you'd have to believe
I think that Ronald Reagan had a naturalness with the telling of his stories that were conservative in nature, that you had a sense that this was in his core. I don't think that there was anybody who thought Reagan was making it up. In the case of Romney, and again, part of it is the way he expresses himself, and it may be that he's just a little awkward with regard to it. There are these doubts that are created by the way he carries himself on it, and also these other things. Why doesn't he, go on Russia's program? Why doesn't he do some of these things that people wonder why he hasn't addressed?
Well, I think that he has addressed all these issues, and I think that, if you're getting down to
he's addressed the issues. Can you honestly say that he's acting like conservatives generally act?
Yes. Like you said, he's saying all the right things.
But he's saying them oddly, though. I mean, I'm only telling you why people have these. Look what he said. I was a severely conservative governor. Who talks like that?
Well, who talks like Sam?
Why would you say you're asking a separate question? The whole discussion here is about Romney and why he hasn't closed the deal. And I'm telling you that he's good enough for me. I'm merely saying what it is that rubs people. And, in the case of Ann Coulter, this is somebody who's been out there in support of him for months. Why didn't he run over and shake her hand and say thank you? Some people just get the impression that he thinks people like me, he looks at people like me and we give him the heebie-jeebies.
I don't think so. Look at Chris Christie. I mean, they say he's an establishment candidate. He's got Chris.
You're talking about everybody other. You're talking about everybody other.
But you're
than Romney and his style. This discussion's about Romney. It's about his uneasy and tenuous relationship with a lot of people who are clearly mainstream American conservatives who want to embrace him. And the reason he hasn't been embraced isn't because of anything about them or us. It's something about Romney himself that makes himself off-putting.
But you're saying it's not substance, then it's personality. Is he supposed to slit his wrist on the stage and, bleed all over it like the old Stones song to make people believe that he's a conservative? I don't know what else he could do. I mean, he's trying everything he can.
You're right about that, but think how you just put it. I don't know what else he can do. Like, he's got to prove it. There's a reason why some people feel as though he's got to prove it, though.
But you don't think he likes – you're saying you don't like the way he talks or the way he speaks or the way he looks.
Put it this way. Anybody who's listened to my show knows I'm a conservative, right?
I'm right of you, Mark. I'm right of you, and I love Rob.
No, I didn't ask you that. I said anybody who listens to my show knows that I'm conservative. Because when I express myself, you can tell that there's passion and beliefs that are behind it. People don't get that from Romney.
Well, is it the tone of his voice? Is it his verbiage?
Yes.
That's what I don't understand.
Yes. That's the answer.
Then he needs a speech coach. It's not that he's not.
Well, but why does he need the coach?
Well,
you see where I'm coming from on this? Why would he need to be coached in talking the way conservatives talk?
Well, you have to be more. Well, I don't know. He's saying the right things. You're saying that. You're saying that he's saying the right things.
He is not saying them in a way that seems authentic and genuine. And I'm acknowledging he's running a more conservative campaign, I think, probably than any of the other three that are running. It'd be close with Santorum, but I think he's running a more conservative campaign than them. And he ran a conservative campaign in 2008. I'm saying all of that stuff. There's a reason, though, if he indeed is doing that some people out there have these incredible doubts about whether or not he's a conservative. That's just a statement of fact. There's got to be. What's your theory as to why some people aren't sold on whether or not he's conservative? What's your theory then?
I just think that people are buying into the fact that they're saying he's an establishment candidate, and they listen to Santorum, and they listen to Gingrich, and they listen to some people like Rush and people like Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin picks on him, and she was the one that's supporting a colony on the moon, and she's supposed to be the maven of the Tea Party. This whole campaign has turned conservatives into a bunch of hypocrites.
I'm not denying a lot. I'm not denying a lot of that, but I meant more like with individual people, why they're having a hard time warming up to him and they don't trust that he is conservative.
I just think it's I think the only reason
you've got to admit it's got to have something to do with him.
Well, no, but
if he is conservative, but he can't convince some people that he is, it's got to be about some way that he's conducting and carrying himself.
It's all presentation, then.
It is.
Well,
that's right.
You can't fall if he's saying all the right things and you feel in his heart that he believes it.
That's the part that the doubt is on. That's where the doubt is. Hang on. That's where the doubt is. Does he believe it in his heart? You are convinced that he does.
I can prove. Can I give you one example?
No, you're not. I don't need you to convince me. I'm just commenting on why he's had a hard time making the connection with others that he's made with you. Well, that's a guy who's conservative, passionate supporter of Mitt. And I applaud it. And again, he's conservative enough for me. And I think that anybody says that he's not running when I see people say that Gingrich is more conservative than Romney, I mean, you're crazy. For the last 10 years of his life, Newt Gingrich has been wandering around in Liberalville with his ethanol subsidies, with his man-caused global warming, with his commercials with Nancy Pelosi, with his shilling for Freddie Mac. We could go on and on and on and on and on. Clearly, Mitt Romney's more conservative than Gingrich. I'm just commenting on the fact that for many people, including some people, who are kind of wanting to like him and in many cases carrying his water, you just get that sense and the feeling. And I describe it to like the kind of Neil Kedzie thing. Well, I don't want to explain my position on mining to Mark Belling. Looks down his nose at a right-winger like it. That's the sense you get. Again, I'm telling you, I think Romney is a conservative. Got a problem with the issue on health care, but I think he is conservative. But boy, he sure doesn't talk the way any conservative I know talks. Steve in Cedarburg, you're on News Talk 1130 WISN.
Yeah, Mark, if you're okay with Romney, do you get more excited about Romney depending on who he picks as a VP?
Absolutely.
Who would that pick be?
Oh, I could give you 20 names that would enthuse me. Marco Rubio, Paul Ryan, any of those conservatives who are out there on the cutting edge of the Eric Cantor. You could go on and on with the list of those conservatives that are out there and have clearly demonstrated a passion for the ideas that many of us share. Kind of somebody who's got bona fides within the movement. I think that's what he needs. And I think unless he's crazy, and he's not, that is what he's going to do with his running mate.
Well, and the quicker we can get there, the better. So let's get on with it so we can get Biden pulled into this whole thing with Obama, too. It's not just Obama.
This requires that the deal be closed, but he hasn't been able to close the deal yet, has he?
Well, would a few of the VP possibilities help close the deal? He's got to win a few primaries he's got to win Michigan and then win a lot of states on Super Tuesday. That's what he's got to do. And that means he's got to persuade Republican voters to vote for him. I'm just doing the psychoanalysis here of why he hasn't closed the deal with them. And I'm saying this as somebody who would never vote for Gingrich and never vote for Paul. I'm
Just trying to tell you why a lot of people are having a hard time just warming up and wanting to hug and embrace Mitt Romney, including some people who are pretty, look at the Weekly Standard magazine, Bill Kristol. I mean, they're almost begging that this race continue. There are some people just hoping Santorum does well because they don't want it to be Mitt Romney. I'm just trying to examine why that is, why this fear of Mitt Romney. Why hasn't he been able to persuade conservatives that he's one of us? And you go back, and it's a lot of things. A lot of it is the style. I think clearly some of it is his stubbornness and not admitting that Romney Care was a mistake. There are those things. But you are right. He has a lot less baggage than, say, a Gingrich does or a Paul does, or for that matter, even on the spending issues that a Santorum does in terms of having to prove that he's a conservative. It's just that when you hear Rick Santorum talk, he sounds more conservative than Mitt Romney. Gingrich sounds more conservative, even though he's not. Gingrich is just the guy who talks out of both sides of his mouth. But when he talks conservative, it comes across more convincing than when Mitt talks conservative. Why would Mitt say, I'm not worried about the poor, they have a safety net? Conservatives like me have to explain what he meant. He should be able to explain what he meant. He shouldn't have to be translated into conservative, if you know what I mean. Thank you for the call. To Alan Mequon, you're on News Talk 1130 WISN.
Hey, Mark, great show, great topic. 2 points. One is I think conservatives are suffering from paralysis from analysis. This is craziness. I mean, if you go back to Romney's CPAC speech in 2008, very Reagan-esque, very Paul Ryan-esque.
Best speech he ever gave. I read it on the air. I agree with you. Best speech he ever gave. It was. Why haven't I heard it for 4 years then?
Well, the other
That's the one I want. You just hit it, Al. That's the one I want him to give.
Well, the other point here is that
instead we get this, Romney, I can create jobs, I can manage, I did this, I ran a payroll, I balanced the budget. I want to hear the speech you just described.
But Romney is looking at after the nomination, he's got to win over the independents. So he's soft-pedaling this a little bit, in my view, because he wants to garner the independent vote, and those folks are afraid there's a right-wing conservative in Romney. He doesn't want to provide that aspect, and I think he's playing this very smartly. Obviously, the conservatives need to stop this nonsense. Your previous caller about Romney slashing his wrist on stage to prove to these people. I mean, the conservatives got to get real, and they got to get realistic, or they're going to blow this whole thing.
Well, remember, they now might have an alternative, though. And you say, yeah, they might. If they're going to, they do have an alternative. Michigan's coming up. They can vote for Santorum or they can vote for Romney.
Santorum, what has he done?
I'm just saying they have that choice.
But a losing senator from Pennsylvania, he lost by a landslide.
That's true.
He is not electable.
You're arguing who they should vote for. I'm merely saying they do have a choice.
Well, I think conservatives need to get real, get on board with Romney, and go. Because they're going to.
Isn't some of the onus on what you described, though, on Romney?
I believe he's not a perfect man. The guy probably works 12, 15 hours a day. He gets on stage, blows a line, says something ridiculous like severely conservative. You got to cut the guy a little bit of a slack. He's probably on a high energy situation.
I have cut him a lot of slack.
Well,
and until Santorum emerged, I was I'm the guy that went to bat on the awful attacks on him from, Fat Gingrich down there, in which he criticized Romney for committing the sin of saving businesses and making money. This coming from a guy who was taking money from Freddie Mac, which helped torque out the American economy. I did all of those things. I'm merely talking about, in looking at this thing, in wondering why some conservatives just can't stand up and say, I really like Mitt Romney. And this is the reason for it. And but the onus is on him to close off. No, that's not true. The onus is always on the candidate to close the deal. And, the emergence of Santorum is a threat to Romney. He may survive it. And if he does survive it, I think it'll help him as he goes forward in the next campaign. But there is now an alternative to him, and Mick can't automatically assume that everybody's going to fall in line and embrace him. Thanks for the call. We did get 3 callers in a row, passionate in the defense of Romney. I think the problem out there is that there aren't enough people that have that passion for Romney. If Romney had the kind of passion those callers had, this thing probably would be over right now. As I see it. I offer no predictions. I am out of the Republican prediction business, as you know. I offer no predictions. I'm merely giving you my thoughts. And I think the New York Times story was very, very apt. I mean, you go to 40 prominent American conservatives, Rush, Bill Kristol, just name the list of who the 40 biggest shots there are. I think all will kind of say the same thing. Well, Matt, yeah, he's probably sort of one of us, but the way we put things is not the way he puts things. Krauthammer's quote was in the New York Times piece. And in fact, Paul thinks Krauthammer is very, very smart. Yeah, okay, let's see what he got. I had Krauthammer's quote. I thought, no, did I already throw away the story I was reading? Hang on. Well, he said what if you were listening when I read his quote, you would have known what it was. I can't find it right now. Oh, literally can't find the piece that I just read on the air only a couple of minutes ago. No, Krauthammer's take on it is the same as almost everyone's, that Mitt Romney seems to have a hard time embracing the ideas of conservatism and speaking in the same fashion that conservatives speak. And that's why there are doubts that are out there about his authenticity. Is this what's in his heart? Is this what's in his core? Are these the things he believes? And the concern that people have is real. They are afraid that he's going to get in there and sell them out. That doesn't mean he will. That's the concern, though, that he'll get in and sell us out. Ann Coulter's pounding the table saying he won't. But there is a fair amount of faith that we have to take this all on. I wanted to hear what Krauthammer, the Washington Post, what his assessment of this is. Got it here somewhere. Here it is. The real problem here is that it shows he doesn't have fluency with conservative ideas. The moral case for conservative economics is that our policy is going to help everybody, including the poor. In other words, what Krauthammer says, you get the sense that Romney hasn't thought as deeply about these conservative policies as some of the others, and that's why you wonder whether or not he's simply spouting out these ideas because they're the ones that he has to offer, that he doesn't seem as comfortable with them or he doesn't seem as familiar with them. Which is why he says, I'm not worried about the poor, they have a safety net. There isn't a conservative leader in America who talks about economic policies pertaining to the poor like that. They instead argue that if you want to help the poor, let's get some income growth in this country. Let's let people make money so we put people back to work. That's what conservatives say. So that's Krauthammer's analysis, that Romney doesn't seem to be a guy who speaks with any sense of passion or, for that matter, deep familiarity or knowledge like he's been talking about or thinking about these things. And I think a lot of it is that Mitt Romney is more of a manager than he is an ideologue, which is fine, so long as he manages the country in a conservative fashion. But there's a distrust as to whether or not that's what he'd do. 554.